where money, power, and history collide. And nothing is ever as simple as it looks. We talk about digital scarcity like it's a new invention, like Bitcoin was the first time humans turned math into value. But long before blockchain, there was another immutable ledger, carved not into code, but into soil. Land was the original hard asset, finite, visible, unforgeable. The one thing that couldn't be printed, mined, or cloned. And because of that, every system that came after, gold, credit, fiat, crypto, has been a desperate attempt to recreate what land already was, a store of value backed by reality. You see, money was born because not everyone could own land. It was a receipt for access, a way to trade slices of permanence without owning the earth itself. But the truth never changed. Land wasn't created to serve money. Money was created to serve land. In ancient Egypt, wealth wasn't counted in coins. It was counted in acres along the Nile. Floodplains were value. Harvests were liquidity. Pharaohs didn't hoard metal. They hoarded territory. Whoever controlled the soil controlled life. Fast forward to Rome, the world's first corporate empire. The Senate distributed conquered land as latifundia. Vast estates worked by slaves. Land wasn't just income, it was citizenship. Collateral and status rolled into one. The poor didn't just lack money, they lacked a claim on existence itself. And when Rome collapsed, the currency it left behind wasn't gold coins, it was feudalism. Europe's dark ages were not defined by ignorance, but by ownership. The king owned the crown, the church owned the land, everyone else owned nothing. That's the part most people miss when they talk about the good old days of sound money. There was nothing sound about it if you didn't have a title deed. You could work a field for 40 years and still die owing rent to someone who had never touched the soil. Land was wealth, but only for the few allowed to claim it. That exclusivity was its genius. The blockchain of the Middle Ages wasn't digital. It was written in law, lineage, and violence. It was transparent to everyone who mattered, and immutable to everyone who didn't. That system didn't end because it failed. It ended because it became too obvious. The peasants revolted, but the merchants rose. And by the time capitalism arrived, land had evolved, not disappeared. The Industrial Revolution was financed on land mortgages. Banks didn't lend against ideas, they lent against acres. Factories were built on collateral. Railroads were laid across purchased rights of way. Even the first government bonds, the so-called consols in Britain, were backed by land rents. When capitalism claimed it had replaced feudalism, it was lying. It simply monetized it. Land became financialized, chopped into parcels, titled, taxed, and securitized. Ownership went from privilege to product, and the same aristocratic logic rebranded itself as property rights. The feudal lord became the landlord. The serf became the tenant. Different names, same dependency. The irony? Every time humanity creates a new form of wealth, we end up rebuilding the same hierarchy. Gold was just condensed land, mined scarcity. Fiat was land abstracted, promises to pay rent in paper. And now Bitcoin, for all its radical promise, is digital land. Finite, mined, owned, and defended by code instead of soldiers. Scarcity never died. We just learned how to simulate it. You can feel it in how people talk about Bitcoin. It's digital real estate. It's unforgeable property. It's freedom from the state. All language pulled straight from feudal DNA. Because deep down, humans still crave one thing, ownership that outlives them. Bitcoiners call it self-sovereignty. The nobles of old called it a title. Different tools, same impulse. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Even in a digital age, power still belongs to whoever controls the ground you stand on. Crypto wealth, stock wealth, paper wealth, it all flows back into real estate. When the price goes up, where do the winners park their profits? Land. When inflation hits, what asset holds value best? Land. And when markets crash, what do central banks buy to stabilize everything? Mortgages, claims on land. You can't eat Bitcoin. You can't live inside a share certificate. But you can sleep on land. You can plant on land. You can defend land. That's why every revolution that pretends to escape it eventually circles back to it. Because land isn't an asset. It's the stage where every other asset performs. We like to think money evolves, that technology makes us freer. But if you zoom out far enough, you'll notice the same cycle repeating across centuries. First comes land, then comes credit, then comes collapse. And when the paper burns, we run back to the only thing left that can't be printed: dirt. It happened after the South Sea bubble in the 1700s. It happened after the stock crashes of 1929 and 2008. Every digital boom ends in a very physical rush back to real property. And that's not superstition, it's gravity. Because while currencies inflate, technologies change, and empires fall, land just sits there, quietly compounding. It's the only investment that doesn't move, yet somehow everything else moves around it. Every age claims to have invented a better version of land: gold, bonds, fiat, crypto. But none of them replace it. They only orbit it. Even central banks. the apex of abstract finance, still hoard land through real estate holdings and government property portfolios. They don't say it out loud, but they know, in the end, all value must settle somewhere real. That's the cruel genius of land. It doesn't have to change to stay relevant. Everything else does. Today, the value of all the world's real estate is over $380 trillion, more than the global stock and bond markets combined. Let that sink in. Every innovation, every financial product, every line of digital code we've ever invented still sits beneath a ceiling made of land. It's the real reserve currency, the collateral behind civilization. Land doesn't just generate wealth, it defines it. It's the benchmark for credit, the backbone of taxation, and the invisible foundation of the monetary system. When governments borrow, they borrow against it. When banks lend, they lend into it. And when nations collapse, it's the land, not the paper, that survives the ruins. The modern world likes to pretend ownership is fluid, that we've moved beyond the old hierarchies. But every system still answers to the same map, just with new borders. The top 10% of humanity now owns more than 85% of the world's land value. That's not a coincidence. That's the persistence of feudalism, hidden behind market prices and mortgage contracts. We call it a housing market, but that's a polite lie. It's not a market, it's a sorting mechanism. Real estate doesn't just shelter people, it shelters capital. The wealthy don't buy homes to live in them. They buy them to store money. Money that needs a physical anchor in a digital storm. In cities like London, Vancouver, and New York, entire neighborhoods have turned into vaults. Windows dark, doors locked, properties owned by shell companies registered in offshore trusts. It's not housing, it's collateral with a skyline. The financial system depends on this. Without real estate, most modern credit would vanish overnight. Mortgages are what turn potential into liquidity. The moment you sign a deed, your property becomes a data point in the machinery of global finance. That's why interest rates are the true ruler of modern life. They're not just about money. They're about land access. Raise rates, and the gates close. Lower them, and the bidding wars begin. We treat it as economic policy, but it's closer to land rationing. And yet, despite all this complexity, the principle hasn't changed since the first medieval charter. The few own, the many rent. We just replaced the manor house with a mortgage. But here's the twist. For the first time in history, the scarcity of land is no longer just physical, it's engineered. Governments limit supply through zoning. Developers inflate prices through speculation. Central banks keep credit cheap enough to make the game look fair. Every actor has learned to protect the illusion of scarcity, because the entire system depends on it. If land became truly affordable, if ownership were universal, the hierarchy would collapse. Because land isn't just where value lives, it's where power hides. You can see this more clearly in the developing world, where land rights are still unstable. In Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia, the fight for title is the fight for survival. Corporations and elites quietly buy up millions of acres, often larger than entire countries, for agriculture, lithium, or future carbon credits. These aren't real estate deals. They're resource preclaims on the 21st century. Digital wealth is the illusion of liquidity. Land is the right to extract reality itself. And that's what makes the comparison to Bitcoin sting. Bitcoin was supposed to break the monopoly, to give people a form of ownership that governments couldn't touch. In the beginning, it looked like it might. A decentralized ledger, a finite supply, a network outside of politics. But the longer it lived, the more it began to look like the world it tried to replace. The early adopters became the landlords of cyberspace. They mined first, accumulated most, and now rent out their holdings through exchanges and lending platforms. The promise of freedom turned into another pyramid of timing and access. Scarcity, once again, concentrated at the top. And when those profits were made, they flowed back into the real world, into real property. Crypto gains became condos, tokens became titles. Because at the end of every digital illusion, the winners cash out into the same physical scarcity. Land. Even the language gave it away. Bitcoin mining. Real estate in the metaverse. It's all the same metaphor, the dream of digital land ownership for a world that can't afford the real thing. But the irony is deeper than that. For all the talk about decentralization, even Bitcoin depends on geography, on electricity hardware and physical servers rooted somewhere on Earth. Its supposed independence is an illusion. It's land again, wearing a new mask. So what does this mean for the future of wealth? It means the game never really moved online. It just expanded the board. And the same rules still apply. He who controls scarcity controls value. He who controls value controls time. And he who controls time owns everyone else's labor. That's the hidden continuity of civilization. From the pharaohs to the metaverse, power has always been territorial, not metaphorical. Even the richest companies in the world, Apple, Google, Amazon, measure their dominance not just in servers or code, but in land footprint. Massive campuses, data centers, real estate portfolios, because they understand something the rest of us forgot. No matter how digital life becomes, control still requires dirt. The Romans had their empire. The British had their colonies. Today, it's real estate investment trusts and sovereign wealth funds buying the planet piece by piece, mortgage by mortgage. And the ordinary person, for all the talk of financial freedom, is more landless than ever before. Owning a home has become the modern test of citizenship. The difference between being inside the system and outside of it. Renting isn't failure, it's taxation without legacy. That's the part of the story nobody tells you when they talk about Bitcoin or democratized finance. The rich don't hoard cash. They hoard permanence. And permanence only exists in one place, the ground beneath your feet. Because in the end, every currency, every coin, bond, or token is just a promise that you'll be allowed to stay on the land. That's the original contract. And everything else is commentary. You can invent new technologies, new tokens, new financial utopias. But until you solve the problem of ownership, you're just running simulations. And history doesn't reward simulations. It rewards whoever holds the deed. So the next time someone tells you Bitcoin is digital gold, remind them gold was only valuable because it came from land. And when the Wi-Fi drops, when the markets crash, when the servers go dark, it won't be the blockchain that feeds you. It'll be the soil someone else owns. Land was the first asset. It will be the last. Because no matter how fast we innovate, how high we fly, or how virtual our world becomes, they're not making any more of it. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers, and I'll show you where to look.